So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing today. We're watching that, reviewing that, commenting on it. You can hear it through the phone if you're watching vertical. You can also watch it with us on the horizontal stream that we're doing simultaneously on this channel. So everybody's got an option to watch it. All right. Without further ado, let's get to it. I'm gonna press play and we're gonna talk about it in about 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes we watch. Okay, and go.
It was more like a dream than reality. I must have thought it was a dream while you were here with me. When you were near, I didn't think you would leave. When you were gone, it was too much to believe. So with tomorrow, I will borrow another moment of joy from sorrow, and another dream, and another with tomorrow. So with the sun that won't time, just a little bit. There won't be reasons, no expressions for my place tonight. There was so much I was told it wasn't real. So many things that I could not taste, but I could feel. So tomorrow, I'll borrow another moment of joy, sorrow, and another dream, and another
Jiang Qing, the widow of Mao Zedong, had been locked away in solitary confinement for 10 years. Over that time, she had hoarded socks and handkerchiefs until she had enough to make a rope. And in 1991, she hanged herself. She left a note. It said, "Today, the revolution has been stolen by a clique led by Deng Xiaoping. The result is that unending evils have been unleashed on the Chinese people. Chairman, your student and fighter, is coming to see you." Jiang Qing's great enemy, Deng Xiaoping, was now all-powerful. The new China he had created was growing rapidly, building vast factories to send goods into the West. He had got rid of all Jiang Qing's revolutionary dreams, but he had also smashed all visions of democracy by sending troops into Tiananmen Square. But Tiananmen Square had been a disaster for the regime, and it also raised a terrible question. If China no longer believed in revolutionary communism or in democracy, what did it believe in, apart from money? Deng Xiaoping's solution was to go back into the past and reawaken an old, powerful fear. That what had happened in Tiananmen Square had really been part of a giant conspiracy by the West to destroy China. It was a conspiracy, he said, that had been going on for 150 years. It had begun back in the 19th century, when the British had invaded China and forced opium onto the Chinese people. Deng now ordered a vast propaganda campaign to begin. Its aim was to spread the idea of a conspiracy. At the centre of the campaign was a multi-million-dollar film, including British actors. It told the story of how the British had brought hundreds of tons of opium into the port of Canton, and how the Chinese had tried to stop them. But the British, led by Queen Victoria, were determined to smash their resistance and use the opium to reduce the Chinese people to zombies, and so control the whole world.
Gentlemen, the fact is, whoever gets hold of China will have the entire East. The 19th century.
The Chinese propaganda even created an early computer game where you could fight against the British as they invaded. Now, the campaign said, the West are trying to do the same again. What the Chinese were alleging in their campaign was historically accurate. But what they didn't know was that the opium trade had also had powerful consequences inside Britain itself. It had started to undermine the self-confidence of the British Empire and introduce a dark and corrosive fear into the heart of British society. By the middle of the 19th century, those who ran Britain were already aware of the horrors created by the slave trade. For 200 years, the British had transported millions of Africans to become slaves in their colonies in the Caribbean and in the Americas. It had been one of the main forces behind the rise of the British Empire. Now they began to realize that they had also done something terrible to China. That by forcing opium onto the country, they had poisoned and corrupted millions of people. They hadn't enslaved them physically, they had enslaved their minds. And in return, Britain had received a vast wave of money, in silver, that made it the richest and most powerful country in the world. One historian wrote, deeply involved as it was in one of the most pernicious, yet well-organized and profitable drug trades that has ever existed, the British Empire was rotten at its heart. And that knowledge led to guilt. In the 1870s, a mass movement was formed. It was called the Society for the Suppression of the Opium Trade. It published pamphlets and books about the horrors that were happening in China. They caused a sensation, and hundreds of thousands joined the movement. But as the campaign grew, a strange thing happened. The guilt over what Britain had done to China began to mutate. It changed into fear. And at the end of the 19th century, a hysteria swept Britain, that the Chinese were preparing to take their revenge. There was a panic about Chinese-run opium dens in all the major cities. The truth was that there were less than 1,000 Chinese in Britain at that time, but the hysteria ran out of control. It was called the Yellow Peril. The panic also spread through America, especially the West Coast, where there were Chinese migrant workers. Novel after novel was published in both Britain and America with Chinese villains who were trying to destroy Western civilization. It culminated with the invention of a global villain, Dr. Fu Manchu. Fu Manchu is described by his creator, a novelist called Sax Rohmer, as a yellow Satan, an archangel of evil who wants to take over the whole world and revenge himself on the white race.
The injection of the serum will make his brain mine. In other words, he becomes a reflection of my will. He will do as I command, exactly as though I were doing it.
In the name of the British government, I demand the release of this boy.
British government. I'll wipe them and the whole oppressive white race off the face of the earth when I get the sword and master who call the thieving millions of acres to the uprising. This is only the beginning. I will wipe out your whole accursed white race.
Okay, so let's talk about what we just saw right there in the documentary. By the way, shout out to everybody up in the chat. Shout out to George Albert 5600 speaking Hungarian. Shout out to SK up in the chat. Shout out to everybody who joined the conversation. We're watching Can't Get You Out of My Head. Shout out to, by the way, who else? Who else is in here? The Wolfus 1421. Shout out to Master Potts or something like that. Anyway, in my opinion, it's hard for me to believe that Anglo racism towards the Chinese was started because of the paranoia of the idea that Chinese people are going to somehow get revenge for all the drugs that were pushed into their country. I don't buy that, really. I believe racism was sort of the byproduct of the exploitation from the very beginning, rather than a byproduct of some sort of white guilt that the British might have felt. Though it is an interesting theory, I do see that how capitalism and exploitation of different groups of people creates the sort of psychoses and neuroses that makes people afraid of the other. But I'm just not seeing the guilt aspect of it. But yeah, more people should learn about how the fact that the British Empire was essentially a slave trading, drug dealing criminal enterprise. That's what the British Empire was. A slave trading, drug dealing, mass raping, warmongering, drug dealing criminal enterprise. That's what it was. Anyway, we're going to continue for the next 10 minutes. If you want to have a comment or if you want to speak to me directly, anybody could call in and speak to me directly right now by clicking the link in the description. So if you have anything that you want to say to me or any commentary that you want to give about this documentary or about anything I've ever said on this channel, click the link and call in. Anybody is welcome. Anybody is welcome. Anyway, next 10 minutes and then we'll give our next commentary. Let's go.
But at home, in both Britain and America, there were still forces deep in the heart of both societies that had little to do with democracy.
Man with a gun. 12 Georgia, 30 ID additional units, 6-7 in Dacre. I got 415 man with a gun.
It seemed that despite all the changes of the past 30 years, that underneath the old structures of power and the corruption and the anger that created was still there. In Los Angeles in March 1991, Rodney King was chased and stopped by police for drunken driving. Despite offering no resistance, he was beaten repeatedly by 4 officers. It was videoed by a man watching from a balcony. He took it to the police, but no one was interested. So he gave the tape to a local TV station. When it was shown, there was an outburst of anger against the police violence. 4 of the officers were put on trial. But they were all acquitted by an overwhelmingly white jury.
Due to the escalation of the situation and seriousness of the problems that are occurring, the sheriff has mobilized all department personnel.
For 6 days, thousands of people rose up and rioted across Los Angeles, which was only stopped when the National Guard and soldiers and Marines were brought onto the streets. It was an outpouring of the anger that had been simmering throughout the 1980s in the black community. And despite all the reforms and the changes in attitude since the 1960s, nothing had really changed. It seemed that those in power in America were still deeply racist and would use violence against blacks to maintain that power.
That's just an example of the frustration that's being felt right here.
In Britain, a series of scandals revealed that dozens of innocent people had been held in jail, some for over 15 years. They included the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6. Most of them were Irishmen who had been accused of being members of the IRA and planting bombs in English cities. Every time they had tried to prove their innocence, they had been blocked by some of the most senior figures in the British establishment, despite overwhelming evidence of false confessions and fake evidence. Eminent men at the very centre of power, from the most senior law lord to the Attorney General and to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, all of them, it was alleged, knew that the prisoners were innocent. But they had done nothing, and the evidence remained locked away, because they had an unshakable conviction that the establishment must never be shown to be wrong. Finally, in March 1991, the Birmingham 6 were freed at the Old Bailey.
Ladies and gentlemen, for 16 and a half years, we've been playing used as political scapegoats for people in there at the highest. The police told us from the start that they knew we hadn't done it. They told us they didn't care who done it. They told us that we were selected and that they were going to frame us just to keep the people in there happy. That's what it's all about. Justice! Justice! I don't think them people in there have got the intelligence nor the honesty to spell the word, never mind dispense it. They're rotten.
But there were others, also at the heart of power in Britain, who seemed to have lost all contact with reality. The intelligence agencies, from MI6 to GCHQ, whose job was to watch and monitor what was happening in the world, had completely failed to predict the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mrs. Thatcher, who had supported the spies throughout the 1980s, was shocked. Her foreign policy advisor wrote, "All that intelligence that they gave us didn't tell us the one thing we needed to know, that the Soviet Union was about to collapse. It was a colossal failure of the whole Western system of intelligence." But some of the spies still didn't believe what was happening. Sir Percy Craddock was head of the Joint Intelligence Committee. Despite everything, he was convinced the Soviets were just faking the collapse. They were just up to their usual tricks. They were still planning to take over the world. Both Britain and America were societies that had been built on empire and conquest, through violence and the exercise of power. But neither of them had ever faced up to this. And instead, they had both built dreamlike myths about their exceptionalism, to shield and protect themselves. But in both cases, those myths were rooted in fear. In Britain, at the start of the 20th century, not only were those in charge frightened by what they had done abroad, with the slave trade and in China, but they now had a feeling that it was coming closer. Something dangerous might also be happening inside England itself. The Empire had led to giant industrial cities rising up all across England. They were dark, frightening places where millions of people lived in appalling conditions. What alarmed those in charge was the violence and the anger that was building up there among what was called the masses. The danger also seemed to come from the top of society as well. From the new industrialists and bankers who ran the global empire. They also seemed to be out of control. There was a wave of financial scandals, and no one seemed to be able to stop them. The novelist E.M. Forster wrote, "England is being menaced by the inner darkness in high places that has come with this commercial age."
All right, so we're going to pick up right here at the 1932 mark. Shout out to everybody up in the chat. Shout out to Robert Murphy and everybody else listening. Shout out to Nelson Moreno. I see he's trying to get in, but I don't know why he can't get in. Listen, those past 10 minutes when he's talking about the fall of the Soviet Union, but also how in the West, in America in particular, repression of freedom and repression of people's expression was still, you know, very prevalent and maybe becoming even more so through wanton, brazen police violence like the beating of Rodney King that the whole world saw, and then the LA riots that burnt the whole city to the ground. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like it's continuing this documentary's theme that, you know, when people want freedom, there is a force that fights against it, and it does it in the name of maintaining freedom and stability. So in a macro sense, the Western free world won against the oppressive, you know, non-democratic Eastern or Soviet or communist world. And then in the meantime, the contradiction is that within the Western world are the myths that it tells itself that it is free and democratic, even though America and England in particular and the West in general were built upon and still are built upon the exploitation of the global South. There's still that myth going on, and yet and still how they treat their own people within the societies is unfair and unjust, as we see in America today and over 30 years ago. So yeah, that's a very interesting take to have. I'm still not buying this idea, though, that the fear that the West had of the other is built on guilt. I don't think most white people feel guilty about anything in life, because most people in general are very apathetic, very ahistoric, very uneducated. Most people are very stupid. Most people don't actually care or even give a second thought to history or the events that have brought us where we are. Because most people just want a good life, whatever that might be. So yeah, I don't think most white people feel guilty about that. And especially at that time, especially over 100+ years ago, definitely the powers that be could give a fuck less about the idea that, you know, they should feel bad about what they did in the past, and that somehow China or the millions of Africans who were trafficked across the sea are going to come back and kick them in their British dick. Like, that's not going to happen. Anyway, we're going to watch the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to review it. Shout out to everybody up in the chat. Shout out to RP Fragrance, all the love brothers. Shout out to all RP Fragrance. All power to the people. And shout out to everybody else tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, share this content. And if you want to holler at me, if you have anything you want to say, jump into the comments. You can also join the conversation by clicking the Zoom link. It's open to anybody. Don't be pussy. Don't be pussy. If you don't like me, say it with your face. Say it with your chest. Say it to my face with your chest. You feel me? Anyway, we're going to watch the next 10 minutes and then I'll give my review of all Can't Get You Out of My Head by Adam Curtis. Let's go.
Trapped by what they saw as a danger below and corruption above, the middle classes retreated. They turned away into another imaginary version of England, where there were none of these threats. It was invented for them by a whole generation of writers, artists, and musicians who, in an act of collective imagination, created a complete dream image of England's past, one that still haunts the country today. At its heart was a vision of a natural order in the countryside outside the cities. One of the key figures was a man called Cecil Sharp. He travelled through England, recording old songs, and he filmed himself and his friends learning old rural dances. Sharp made it absolutely clear that this was a political project. His aim was to create a new kind of English nationalism, which had at its heart the idea of the folk. It was a concept that he had taken from German nationalism, the innocent rural people and their culture.
Now, is the sort of dancing he does the dancing that would be done around here?
Oh, no, they're doing the boat.
What was implicit in Sharp's vision was that it was England before mass democracy had come. An England where villagers lived in harmony and safety, taken care of by the Lord of the Manor.
I've never seen a thing like this before in my life. What do you call it?
I call it Downton Dart.
Sharp was not alone. In 1914, a festival was started in Glastonbury. It ran every year until 1927. It was organised by Rutland Bowden, who wanted it to be the centre of this new English culture. He composed an opera for the festival, which became a national sensation. It was called The Immortal Hour. It is set in a dark, mysterious wood, where there are powerful ancient forces. They can be frightening, but they are also a way of connecting with a forgotten natural order of power in England. They are the lordly ones.
We are more free from the march. They love and are glad and are terrible. When their lungs are shaken because every beating
This is a story that begins in any part of America, wherever you may be. It's a story that begins at your front door, on the street where you live, in your town or village or city, somewhere in America. And paths enchanted that lead to the wonderful pages of a storybook that tell the story of America the Beautiful.
Unlike Britain, America had emerged from the First World War as the most powerful country in the world. Its president, Woodrow Wilson, had a vision that America should now use that power to spread democracy all around the globe. Behind this was a belief in what was called American exceptionalism, that the country was special, not like the old corrupt empires of Europe, and it could use that specialness to remake the world. But the Republicans who controlled Congress refused to back Wilson. They thought that such a crusade would end up corrupting America, and Wilson's dream of a globalized democracy collapsed. Instead, the American economy went into a severe depression. In a growing mood of fear, there were race riots as whites turned on the black communities in the cities. In 1921, a white mob attacked the black areas in the city of Tulsa and destroyed them. They even used aircraft to drop bombs. Out of this fear came an organization called the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had first been formed after the American Civil War, but now it re-emerged. The Klan also believed in the idea of America's exceptionalism. But they took that myth and turned it into something frightening and violent. but they used it to protect themselves against the perceived threat of a growing black population. The model for this dark and hateful version came from a feature film made in 1915 called The Birth of a Nation. It was an epic that caused a sensation, reaching a wider audience than any film had ever done. The director, D.W. Griffith, had based the film on a novel called The Klansman. The image of the Klansman in both the book and in the film was of white-robed figures with burning crosses. These had nothing to do with anything real in America's past. Instead, the novelist had invented them from a romantic vision of an old Scotland and Scottish clans that were portrayed in the novels of Sir Walter Scott, which Scott himself had just made up. Again, like in England, it was a vision of a stable society, watched over and protected by benevolent leaders. Figures from a feudal time, a time before mass democracy, and all its dangers and uncertainties. In real life, the new clan then copied the costumes and imitated the rituals from the film, and it quickly became a mass organisation. By 1925, the Klan had 5 million members, and the political power to mount a mass march on Washington. They called themselves the Invisible Empire. The Klan had a powerful appeal to whites, frightened of the blacks in the ever-expanding cities. And they also revived fears of the Chinese, the Yellow Peril. What the Klansmen were doing was retreating into a mythical version of the past. It gave them a sense of power, and of being part of a natural order. And in Britain, the belief in the idea of a natural order of power continued to grow, even as the real power was declining. And this deluded confidence was going to have very strange consequences for the whole world. After the First World War, a group of upper-class English men and women were sent to Baghdad to create a new country out of the ruins of what had been the Ottoman Empire. The most famous was Gertrude Bell. She was the daughter of a baronet and had been a famous explorer. Almost immediately, hundreds of thousands of Arabs rose up, demanding independence. The British had been financially broken by the war, so they invented a new and cheap way of suppressing the insurgency. They used aircraft to bomb the rebels. They called it aerial policing. And they took back control and set about creating the new country, called Iraq. But because there was no money, the group could also not afford to survey the country. Instead, with no information, Bell and the others simply projected onto the Arabs that powerful romantic dream of an old England. They decided that the middle classes in the cities who had run the country under the Ottoman Empire were corrupt and untrustworthy, which meant that they had to be excluded from power. Instead, power should be given to the sheikhs, who ruled the tribes out in the countryside. To the British, the sheikhs represented the true Iraq, because they hadn't been infected by the corruption of the modern world.
Okay, so yeah, that was the middle parts of episode 5 of Adam Curtis's documentary, Can't Get You Out of My Head. Shout out to Nelson Moreno up in the chat. Shout out to Annie King, 9008, and everybody else joining the live stream. In the previous 10 minutes that we just watched, from the time of the Ku Klux Klan and racism in the United States to the issues of the British Empire declining, I like the part of nation building, how he compares how in the UK, these people were trying to form this idea of the British tradition, the folk people, by going to these rural parts and capturing video and recordings of people's traditional song and dance, and how that compares with America, because it was a nation that exterminated and genocided the original people who lived on the land. So the only way to give birth to the nation was by, villainizing a group of people who were the victims of 400 years of slavery and oppression by, lauding and applauding the Ku Klux Klan and making them seem like the heroes, the builders, the protectors of the new America, the new republic post-Civil War. Very disturbing when you really think about it. But yes, it's like in the UK when the British were building their identity, their idea was to just sort of wash over the last 400 years, you know, when they kidnapped millions of Africans, threw them into the sea, and formed whole new nations based on slave identity and, you know, conquered India and all sorts of wicked shit. And they sort of just glossed over that. And then the American version is like they double down on that. Yes, we did do the genocide. We did do the slavery. We are the bad motherfuckers. Respect us. That's the American way, I guess. So very interesting how we talked about that over those last 10 minutes. Okay. And very interesting how they're now jumping into Iraq and the nation building process of Iraq, which was a colonial project done by the British. And yeah, I think this part is going to be interesting because I haven't heard this story before. And that's what I like the most about this documentary, is that they have a lot of stories that you have not heard before. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to watch the next 10 minutes from the 30-minute mark to the 40-minute mark and then give commentary. Let's go.
Which meant that they had to be excluded from power. Instead, power should be given to the sheikhs, who ruled the tribes out in the countryside. To the British, the sheikhs represented the true Iraq, because they hadn't been infected by the corruption of the modern world. Their system was one of a natural order, just like in the England of the past. The sheikhs, said Gertrude Bell, are like great aristocrats. They will run a system that will maintain a natural equilibrium. The truth was that this picture of Iraq was completely detached from reality. The sheikhs were really marginal figures. Had begun to create a modern, progressive society in the cities. The British now tore that apart and replaced it with a strange dream that had nothing to do with the complex, multi-layered society in front of their eyes, which was really rooted in the strange, dark fears that were rising up in Britain itself as its power declined. Then, in 1932, the British, facing an economic crisis at home, packed up and left, leaving behind them a completely unreal and unstable society.
Waving at the taxis, they keep turning.
At the same time as large numbers of factories began to close across America, a new drug was created. It was made by a company that had been founded by Arthur Sackler. In the 1970s, Sackler had marketed the drug Valium to deal with the feelings of anxiety and loneliness in the suburbs. He had died in the 1980s, but in the mid-90s, his company released a new drug called OxyContin. It was a synthetic form of opium, and it was sold as a painkiller. But then, workers who were being laid off as the factories closed found that they got more benefits if they were disabled. So they went to their doctors and said they were injured. And the doctors gave them OxyContin. They got their benefits. But they also discovered that OxyContin made them feel safe, in a bubble, protected from the anxieties and fears of the new post-industrial world. In the 1950s, as the empire collapsed around them, the British government saw the intelligence agencies as one of the few ways in which Britain could still remain powerful around the world. In the public's eyes, the spies were powerful, glamorous figures, epitomised by James Bond, who proved that Britain still had global power. In reality, MI6 was full of communists who kept defecting to the Soviet Union, while MI5, whose job was to catch such traitors, hadn't caught one for years. A tough police chief from Glasgow was sent in to reform MI5. But the agents would only talk to him in Latin, which he didn't understand. He gave up and told his wife that it was like working in a madhouse. Then MI5 was told by the Americans that one of its own agents was also a traitor.
Surveyor of the Queen's pictures, Sir Anthony Blunt. He, of course, is here. Sir Anthony, if you ever going.
MI5 asked Blunt if he was spying for the Russians. He said yes, he was. So to avoid embarrassing the Queen, they gave him total immunity from prosecution and let him carry on working at Buckingham Palace.
The Negro is ticking under the picture. I've been listening to my little geek.
And it is indeed a clock.
Yes.
And the mechanism is peculiar because the actual time, if you want to know the time, you'll have to look into the eye.
John le Carré had worked as a spy for MI6, but the experience made him understand what this secret world was really about. That in a country whose power had collapsed, leaving only a drab, decaying reality all around, the spies had managed to recreate a magical world, where they could go anywhere they wanted, bug, burgle, and even assassinate people, without any fear of judgment or control. Just like in the Empire.
There is something delicious about being told now we're going to have to burgle that house tonight. And what we'll do is we'll have a policeman outside, and while the owners of the house are away, in case they come back, the policeman will say, I'm sorry, you can't come in, we've had a burglary report in your premises. And these larcenous instincts, which are put to the service of the crown, had a voluptuous quality in the sense that this was a necessary sacrifice of morality. I really believed at last that I'd found a cause I could serve. I also longed for the dignity which great secrecy confers upon you.
All right, we're going to pause it right here because the British are getting very cringe. If you're watching on the horizontal view, there's a middle-aged British woman dressed in full regalia about to strip on the screen, and I just need to pause and brace myself before she gets naked and starts throwing that thing in a circle. Very interesting how they talked about how Iraq was built as a nation, and the British went in there and said, you know what would be great? If we recreated our landed gentry, if we created an aristocracy in Iraq, and who shall lead the aristocracy? Oh yes, the camel herders. Yes, the camel herders. The men who live out in the deserts, those are the natural rulers of Iraq. Not the people of Baghdad who are erudites, who can do the bare minimum of reading. No, no, no. The camel herders, those are the ones who will lead the new Iraq. That said the British. Then they said, whoopsie, we gotta go home. And then they left. And Iraq has been fucked up ever since. Like, yeah, at least America would have done them the decency of giving Iraq a Burger King. But not, alas, the British just left tea. The British just left tea. Anyway, very interesting that last 10 minutes. I'll be honest, this episode has been kind of a drag. I don't feel the story as moving as previous episodes of this series. I thought the part about OxyContin was very interesting. Of course, it's the story that we all know, right? The Rust Belt begins to form when all those giant car manufacturers and other plants leave the northern U.S. and go to India, China, Mexico. Thanks, Bill Clinton. Thanks, NAFTA, right? And, you know, basically all those poor white folks get hit with their own crack epidemic, and it's called OxyContin. Yes, and oxys become like blue magic. They become like blue magic to Paul, John, and Thomas in Michigan, right? And so they all get cracked out. That was kind of cool. Kind of disturbing that in the royal palace they have a picture. They have basically a lawn jockey. And if you don't know what a lawn jockey is, basically white people in the past used to have toys and imagery and figurines that they would put on their lawn that were caricatures of black people. They were Sambos and things like that. You know, big lips, bucked up white eyes, tar black skin, and white people thought that was funny. And in the royal house of the Queen, I guess in the UK, she has one of those types of memorabilia, I guess you could say, in her possession. And it's like a clock where you have to look into the eyes of this Black Sambo type of character to tell the time. And the British are so proud of that. They're so proud of that, right? Also, I thought it was interesting how MI6 was basically, you know, the best way if you were a communist in the UK to defect to the Soviet Union. Just join MI6 and you can get a first class plane ticket to Moscow. That was pretty cool. But yeah, other than that, this is okay. This is interesting. Always disturbing. Always weird what Adam Curtis does in the documentary. But nevertheless, still pretty cool. Once again, this is a live call-in show. If you got anything you want to say to me, say it with your chest. Don't be pussy. Don't hide in the comments. You can talk to me right now just by clicking the link in the comment section, and you can join Zoom. If you too pussy to say anything to me to my face, don't jump up in the comments with all that racial shit that y'all love to call me. You know what I'm saying? Say it to your boy with your face all tight up. Anyway, shout out to everybody in the comments. Shout out to Alive Till Death 8. Shout out to Alive Till Death 8. Shout out to Nelson Moreno. All right. Nelson says, the guy who's talking became an author. He wrote Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Never read it. Can't get you out of my head. It's Nelson telling y'all what we're watching. MI5 is a whole joke. Yes, and MI6 as well. And Dina403. Shout out to Dina403 up in the chat. And shout out to Dogs Are God's Gift as well up in the live stream chat as well. Okay? Continuing, we're gonna go to the next 10 minutes, the 39-minute mark to like the 40-minute mark. Sorry, 39-minute mark to the 50-minute mark, and then we're gonna give commentary there. Let's go.
And these larcenous instincts, which are put to the service of the crown, had a voluptuous quality in the sense that this was a necessary sacrifice of morality. I really believed at last that I found a cause I could serve. I also longed for the dignity which great secrecy confers upon.
In America, the spies and their secret operations were also being used to maintain a fiction. Ever since the Second World War, the American government had been using the CIA to manipulate and overthrow the governments of many other countries. One of the most senior members of the US State Department, Hans Morgenthau, had given this hidden system of power a name. He called it the dual state. America had to do this. One of the most senior members of the US State Department, Hans Morgenthau, had given this hidden system of power a name. He called it the dual state. America had to do this, Morgenthau said, because of the harsh realities of power in the world. But it had to be kept secret from the people, because revealing it would undermine their belief in democracy and in their exceptionalism, a belief that was essential in the Cold War. From the 1950s onwards, the CIA rigged elections, destabilized governments through fake information, and organized violent coups in Italy, Greece, Syria, Iran, Guatemala, South Vietnam, Indonesia, and Chile. In all, the United States ran covert operations to overthrow 66 foreign governments. In 26 cases, they succeeded. Morgenthau believed that this secrecy was creating a dangerous time bomb at the heart of America. And in the mid-1960s, details started to leak out. One of the senior members of the CIA, Miles Copeland, revealed that he had been involved in organizing coups throughout the world, starting in Syria in 1951.
It seems to confirm from the inside many of the people's fears, worst fears, about the way in which American policy is conducted. For example, plotting to overthrow the Syrian government and others. Did you think that's a useful way of conducting a foreign policy?
Keith, I'm not going to make a moral judgment. I'm simply describing the way things are done. It is true. Now, let me finish. It is true that in many cases we would sit around in our attics of the State Department and we would have long discussions. Our government does not interfere in the internal affairs of a sovereign nation, and we meant that from the bottom of our hearts. And then we'd say, but in this is one case where we have to. And so we would have to try to decide how to do what it was we said was against our policy to do. And we did, in fact, interfere in the internal affairs of many sovereign nations.
Wherever he walked, all hell broke loose. Across all the Orient, the flames of violence leaped. Was the quiet stranger the torch? 10,000 mysteries swirled about him. Wherever danger exploded, they found the quiet American.
And in 1961, the CIA decided to overthrow a government in the heart of Africa, in the Congo. 200 years before, the Congo had been at the center of the slave trade. Millions of Africans had been forcibly taken down the river and shipped to America, where their forced labor fueled America's rise to economic power. Now, the country had been given independence by its old colonial rulers, the Belgians, and it was completely unprepared and had collapsed into violence. The CIA were frightened that the new Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, was about to turn for help to the Soviet Union. It meant that the Russians might take control of the giant copper mines in the south of the country. Copper was crucial to the new electronic systems and computers that the Americans were building. They were the foundations of America's new wealth and power. And the CIA helped Lumumba's opponents capture and kill him. And they helped install a dictator in his place. He was called Colonel Mobutu, whose brutal regime the Americans would support for the next 30 years. Rather than establishing a democracy, what the Americans had found themselves doing was continuing the instability which had been created by the old European empires. And then they did the same in Iraq. In 1963, agents from the CIA came to Baghdad to plan another coup. One idea was to secretly poison the communists in the government. But the country the British had created was by now so unstable that before the Americans could act, the Ba'ath Party mounted their own coup.
The streets of ancient Baghdad become the scene of a short but decisive revolution that topples the pro-communist government of Premier Abdel Karim Qasem, shown here on the right. A six-man military junta seizes power on a holy day, and within hours the premier, who reportedly had executed 10,000 people, is himself shot.
But the American agents supported and helped the overthrow. They even gave one of the young Ba'ath Party members, Saddam Hussein, a list of communists in Iraq. Saddam Hussein used it to execute thousands, and it began his rise to power. He later ordered a feature film to be made about his heroic role in the coup, which was made by the British director Terence Young, who had also made the James Bond film, Dr. No. When Deng Xiaoping died, the country he had created was growing fast, becoming more and more powerful. But those who took over knew there were threats. They were frightened of their people, because they knew that having got rid of the communist ideals, they were now totally dependent on the economic system that Deng had created. But that had brought with it the growing force of individuals, a force that had the power to eat away at all the collective ideals that had held the society together. And outside China, they were increasingly frightened of the global financial system, run by the Western bankers. Paranoia and suspicion about the West had gone very deep into the minds of the new rulers. And for the moment, the money from the West continued to pour in, and their power grew further. At the end of 1997, Britain had agreed to hand Hong Kong back to China. During the negotiations, the British had insisted that Hong Kong should remain democratic. The Chinese were shocked by this. They said it was completely hypocritical, because the British had never allowed democracy in Hong Kong. It had always been an authoritarian system, controlled by a brutal and racist police force.
Who's got a mace? Chemical mace? Sergeant! Mace! Come on, mace here! Get the fuck out of here, you little gobshite! Get out! It's got to be subdued, man. No! Get it! Put you out of him! Down it, come on! Get it down! On the floor! Give me! Sarah! Get down! Come on! Get down! Come on! Down on the floor!
Okay, so we're gonna jump in right here. That was a very intense scene to end off on in the last 10 minutes of that 40-minute section, right? That was a lot to take in. Nelson, what's good, man? How are you?
I've been doing great. Thank you. How have you been doing?
I'm doing all right, man. You sound sleepy, tired, high, or fucked up.
I'm normal. I'm just watching the show. I'm hearing it with you.
Okay. So what you think of this episode?
I like this episode, actually. I thought it was kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was one of the most funnier episodes.
Yeah?
For example, in the scene that you're watching right now, they were beating up the guy from Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
I laughed at those gay little costumes.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was one of the more intense scenes. It reminded me of the scene, I think it was in episode 1 or 2, when like this Indian man walked into a barber shop and the white man was like, no, get out.
Yeah, that was episode 1.
Yeah. Speaking of racism, that's unintentionally funny. What did you think of Michael B. Jordan getting called the N-word by that guy with Tourette's at BAFTA?
Actually, I didn't laugh at that. Well, I did laugh at that. Like, God, this is really awkward. I was more like, oh, damn, this shit is really awkward. And it sucks, because that type of Tourette's, your brain wants to communicate the most destructive thing possible.
Right.
So I know it sucks,
Right.
It's embarrassing for everyone.
I think it's embarrassing for Black History Month. We couldn't make it to the very end. We only we have literally 5 days left, and somebody had to call Michael B. Jordan. That shit was hilarious. That you couldn't make that up. That was like a Key and Peele sketch. That was like some Dave Chappelle shit.
The white supremacists, they watched that clip from man, and they had a really good time.
Dog, everybody had a good, because what the fuck? I don't know what's more embarrassing, when Will Smith did that slap on Chris Rock or Michael B. Jordan having to take that like Sidney Poitier. Like,
the slap was more embarrassing because it was like more prolonged, It just started crashing out.
Oh yeah.
Because after the slap, when he went down, when he then sit.
Yeah.
Sorry, you don't talk like that about my wife.
You keep my wife's name out your mouth, bro.
That was a real bad look.
Oh shit! Oh man, there's more to say.
What would you prefer? What would you prefer to be like called a nigger on live TV, or Will Smith slap?
Shit, that's hard. That's really hard because both of them are emasculating as fuck. Hey.
I'm choosing N-word.
You choose? No, man. I gotta fight Will Smith. I wouldn't just sit there and take it. I'd be shocked, but I'm gonna fight that iRobot nigga. And fuck that. I'll show you who's legend.
Will Smith? Which Will Smith? I don't know. Maybe I don't know, maybe I'm valuing bad things, but if that happened to me, I'm thinking, man, I gotta kill Will Smith.
You gotta kill Will Smith.
I gotta kill this guy now, man. But if they call me that Jan-word, I feel small, you know? I feel like, damn.
Yeah.
I'm not automatically thinking, man, I gotta restore my honor.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw Sinners. Did you see Sinners?
I seen it. It was alright.
Yeah, it was just okay. But I'm pretty sure now Sinners is gonna win every Oscar. Like, and the Oscar for Best Romantic Comedy goes to Sinners. Best Sci-Fi, Sinners.
Michael B. Jordan ain't going to have him, man. They're going to give him a bonus Oscar.
and the Oscar for Lifetime Achievement Awards to prove we're not racist, Michael B. Jordan. Boy, that white guilt about to hit the whole way industry.
Was kind of mid.
It was very mid. Yeah.
I mean, I like the white people more. They were more interesting.
Nah.
Irish guy.
No. There's just the whole movie was just all right. People blew it out of proportion, but it was just okay. It was just okay. But now it's gonna be called the greatest movie of all time because Michael B. Jordan is a civil rights icon now.
I mean, if you think about it, it was better than Black Panther.
It was better than Black Panther. Get the fuck,
sure, yeah.
Get the fuck out of here, Nelson. You get nah.
Black Panther is trash, man.
But the first one, the first Black Panther is trash.
Yes.
Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
Like Africa in that movie is so lame. That's not Africa. What the hell is that?
Okay, yes, it is.
That was a studio.
Nah, bruh.
That
No.
was a CGI studio.
Oh man, Wakanda is too lit. Wakanda is too lit, right? What you talking about? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, hello? You
I
there?
can hear you. And that ending scene, it was awful.
What?
I can hear you now.
Oh, when Killmonger said, "Bury me in the sea with my ancestors."
No, that was like kind of cringe. But what was worse was like when they were fighting in the CGI train station.
Okay.
You know, just like flying around and stuff.
Listen. We watched Star Wars. You watched the first Star Wars, and you don't complain. Oh, that's CGI trash, bro. Yoda's a real fucking puppet. Nobody cares.
Like that was like a 60s or 70s movie, man. That's not a fair comparison.
Nah, it's not a fair comparison, but I mean the storyline of the first Black Panther is too fire. But we'll have.
What are you talking about? Did you see the end where he goes to the basketball kid and saying, "No, I'm going to help you, kids"?
Yeah, it was all right. It's as revolutionary as you can get in capitalism, right? It's propaganda because at the end, the Wakandans like give the fucking weapons to the CIA. Like, what the fuck was that? Yeah, it's really bad if you think about it.
Disney's like this, man. Disney makes like this stuff. I don't like Disney stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it is cringe if you think about this. But I mean, it came out at such a pivotal time. Like, you have to put context into Black Panther. You know what I'm saying? It's about context.
Come on, like, what was happening there?
Dude, it was like, it came out like at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, 2010s, like Black consciousness. We had never seen a Black superhero film at that scale. Like, yeah, we had Blade, but Black Panther was like the highest grossing Marvel movie of all time. You know what I'm saying? And it was just incredible to see the whole world cheer for Africa. Like, that had never been done before with any other film. So that's why I think like context matters for Black Panther.
I can see that.
But anyway, one more thing I gotta say, going back to this documentary here. I really like the parts where he's talking about like nation building and identity building and how for the global South, it's been at the other end of a gun by the West, in Congo and Iraq. But China is a very interesting thing because their form of nation building is sort of like been chaotic. They wanted to build on the past and they destroyed all the past. They wanted to be communist and then they went into a type of market socialism. And it's very interesting how like China is sort of like very psychotic as they build their nation. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I was disappointed that you didn't laugh when that story with the communist that was MI6 and he was spying on the Queen.
Yeah.
And because it was too embarrassing to reveal, they left it there.
Yeah, that was hilarious. That was hilarious. No,
I expected the left.
I did.
But, regarding China,
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's China's history. You know, it's constantly a story of renewal. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It rises, it stagnates, it gets destroyed. You know, millions of people die, and then it comes something new out of it.
Yeah.
That's the history of China, really.
Mm.
Since forever.
Yes.
It's a very fragile. Despite its things, despite having a very interesting culture and like, you know, it's a green place, but it has suffered a lot.
Absolutely. So very interesting, and I like how they brought up how the Chinese, in the Chinese mind, it's always like fucking hypocritical when the West comes and says like Hong Kong needs to be democratic, and then like if you ask the Hong Kong, they've been getting their fucking shit rocked by like British pansies, you know, wearing tighty whities. This shit's crazy.
Actually, you know, the interesting thing, the Hong Kong guys, the last, I don't know if it was a viceroy or something, but the last the British guy before he left, he actually was very popular then.
Really?
I think they still like him.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not excusing colonialism, but the guy in charge, the guy who was in charge at that time, he was quite popular. I don't know why.
well, you know, there's still
He was kind of chill, you know.
there's still South Africans that love that last apartheid president, the white guy. They're like, we want the white man back. Give us the white man. But yeah, let's watch the next. We're gonna watch the last 10 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna pick up from when this Chinese man was getting his shit beat up, and then we're gonna watch the last 10 minutes and then comment. All right, let's go.
The British government sent an envoy to negotiate with the Chinese. He was Sir Percy Craig, who had finally accepted that the Cold War was over. But after the talks, Sir Percy announced that he agreed with the Chinese. The demand for democracy, he said, was difficult, because when the British ruled Hong Kong, there had never been any democracy. Sir Percy was not invited to the hangout. And in the pouring rain, Prince Charles watched as the Chinese said goodbye to the British by singing them a Rod Stewart song, Rhythm of My Heart. And despite the Chinese triumphalism, the BBC continued the fantasy of the special virtues of Britain's empire.
China is certainly jubilant about the return of this 412 square miles of territory. And that jubilation is everywhere in Hong Kong. But as we've seen tonight, it isn't quite as simple as that. There's a genuine fondness for Britain's decent contribution here. Genuine fondness for the last governor, too. He's family, as one Chinese Hong Konger described it to me.
In 1998, the very thing the Chinese leaders were frightened of happened. The global financial system went out of control. It began in Thailand, where Western banks had been pouring millions of dollars into a property. Suddenly the bubble burst, and developers defaulted on their loans. Western investors panicked and rushed to get their money out. The crisis then spread all across East Asia, to Korea and Indonesia. In every case, the country's exchange rate crashed, causing economic chaos.
Indonesia's currency has collapsed, losing 80% of its value, and the economy is in ruins. With riots and looting breaking out across the country, there are fears that it's now on the brink of anarchy.
The IMF gave huge loans to try and stabilise the countries. For a moment, it worked. But then the currencies crashed again, because those dollars were used by Western banks to get the rest of their money out of the countries. It left the Asian societies in ruins. To the country's leaders, this was the old corrupt imperialism returning in a modern form.
Power corrupts. As much as government can become corrupt, when invested with absolute power, markets also can become corrupt when equally absolutely powerful. We are seeing the effect of that absolute power today, the impoverishment and misery of millions of people and their eventual slavery.
China managed to escape the crisis. But it seemed to confirm to the country's leaders that their paranoia about the Western conspiracy was right. The West was prepared to use its economic power to loot and wreck the Asian countries, just as it had in the past. They decided that the only way to make China safe was to take control. The chairman, Jiang Zemin, instructed that all the dollars that China got from exporting their goods should be sent back to America and used to buy up the United States government debt. This would make the dollar rise in value, which meant that Chinese goods would be even cheaper. But it would also make interest rates in America low, which meant that people would borrow even more money from the banks and buy even more Chinese goods, which was a virtuous circle. What the Chinese were doing was using the money to create a safe bubble wrapped around the United States that would stabilize the system and so keep China safe. But in the process, Chinese money would create the biggest consumer and property boom ever in history and lead America into a protecting dream world that was increasingly detached from the reality outside. And that dreamlike state was going to have extraordinary consequences, not just for America and China, but for the whole world.
Going through its worst sandstorms in living memory. They've swathed the city in this ochre-coloured blanket of red dust. It's raining now. It's literally raining mud. I just look at it. I mean, this used to be just completely full of the international press. I mean, there's still a lot of foreign journalists here, but just blown apart by the worst sandstorms that people say is in living memory. Watch the cable.
In 2003, America and Britain were preparing to invade Iraq. For George Bush and the Americans, the aim was to bring stability to the Middle East. But Tony Blair saw it in wider terms. It was part of a new kind of global intervention that was not like the empires of the past. Instead, it was a way of liberating millions of people from a brutal dictator, which would then allow them to become free, democratic individuals. But there were people in Britain who knew the strange origins of Iraq. How 80 years before, English administrators had gone there and created a highly unstable society rooted in full streams of England's past. A group of 6 historians came to see Tony Blair. They explained to him the complex reality of the different groups in Iraq and how they could easily turn on the Western intervention. There was silence in the room. Tony Blair said, Saddam Hussein is an evil man who needs to be removed. And the historians left. Then the spies came to see Tony Blair. They told him that there were hidden weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which justified the invasion. And yet again, they were inventing a magical world of hidden threats. And the invasion began. By 2007, the war in Iraq had become a nightmare. The Americans were pouring nearly $1 billion in every day to keep a conflict going that no one knew how to win. In the past, the Vietnam War had caused chaos at home in America. Not just in the mass protests, but the cost of such a gigantic war had wrecked the American economy, with growing inflation and unemployment. Politicians had no idea how to deal with the economic chaos. And it, as much as the protests, had forced them to admit defeat and flee from Saigon. Now, with the Iraq War, there was no effect on the economy. And there were no protests. The reason was the Chinese money. The Chinese continued to buy up more and more of the American government debt, which meant that the consumer boom continued. And safe in their protected bubble, few of the American people protested. The war was far away and had no effect on their lives, which meant there was no pressure on the politicians to admit defeat. And that led them to try ever more desperate measures to achieve victory. But that desperation was going to awaken ghosts from the past that would return in a distorted and frightening form. Sheikh Abdul Sattar Abu Risha was the leader of one of the largest Sunni tribes in Anbar province, outside Baghdad. He came to the Americans and offered to help them. In return for large amounts of money, he said, his tribe would ally with the Americans and create a militia to fight against the insurgents. Above all, against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. In desperation, the Americans agreed. And the idea quickly spread across the country. The Americans giving out millions of dollars to Sunni tribal leaders to create private armies. It was called the Awakening. And Sheikh Abu Risha became a heroic figure. When President Bush came to Iraq, he met the Sheikh to thank him personally for saving the Americans.
On September 14th, 2006, we have made our voice loud and clear. It was the tribals rising against terrorism. And we attacked Al-Qaeda, starting with Al-Anbar. And if they rely on us, we will be able to defeat terrorism and Al-Qaeda from throughout Iraq.
But what the Americans had found themselves doing was exactly the same as the British had done 80 years before. Faced by a complex society that they did not understand, they were turning to the tribes outside the cities and giving them power. They called the militias the Sons of Iraq. And it seemed to work. But in reality, it was going to lead to something even worse.
بالسلام الجمهوري.
3 years later, as the American troops prepared to leave Iraq, the money stopped. And the tribal leaders saw their power disappear. So they made a tactical decision. They turned and allied instead with the very people they had been fighting, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq jihadists. What had begun a long time ago was a make-believe version of England created in the deserts of Mesopotamia as the British Empire fell apart, had now turned into a terrifying nightmare.
How beautiful they are, the lovely ones who dwell in the hills, in the hollow hills. They have faces like flowers, and their breath is the wind that blows over summer meadows filled with dewy clover.
All right, so I'm gonna start commenting right here because I like the parallel he's drawing between America creating the KKK and by extension America created another group of radical religious extremists in a foreign country called ISIS. I like that. That's kind of interesting, very interesting parallel. But what I also really liked is realizing that China is one of the most based countries of all time, if not the most based country of all fucking time. God damn China. Like, God damn China is a fucking beast. But China starts buying up US treasuries as a way to weaponize American capitalism against itself, making the Americans think that they're living in some, great utopia. Meanwhile, they're really just kept afloat by communist money, cheap Chinese goods. I mean, Jesus Christ, China is fucking brilliant. I love it. I love it. Nelson, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
What'd you think of the last part of episode 5?
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I thought, like when Bush had that meeting with that Sheik guy.
Yeah. No, when Bush had on the Chinese silk suit, that was fire. Like, what the fuck? That fucking Texas hillbilly walking around with like the finest silk.
But like when he was having that meeting in the Middle East with that Sheik guy.
Yeah.
And there was that guy translating or something, having that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Like Bush just had like the dumbest look in his face.
It's a dumbass. It's just stupid. Just dumb as hell.
Little dumbass.
Yes.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting how how haunting these colonialism and genocide seems to still lingering.
Yeah.
And how like people have no other real imagination other than the past. You know.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of what we're reading today. Capitalism, really.
Yeah, like how, there sort of is no alternative, especially in this post, Soviet world. You know what I'm saying? And sort of like we're living in this weird in between where, things are sort of out of place. There's no permanence to anything. But when we look at sort of human nature, we're sort of repeating the same things. Like, that's what I think Adam Curtis is getting at.
I mean, there's no real vision of the future. What would you say that Curtis is saying? You think he's saying that like ideology collapsed, or like the movement, like collective organization?
My main thing that I'm getting from this documentary is the idea against collectivism and individualism, and those two things are constantly at odds. That's what I'm constantly getting from every episode. And this one, I feel like, is no different, except this one just sort of more focused on the new sort of Cold War, how China has sort of risen in the place of the Soviets, and now it's neoliberalism versus communism with Chinese characteristics, which are both sort of two ideologies that are formless and nameless and less tied to real ideology. That's what I'm getting.
But like, would you say, not your opinion, but like from Curtis' opinion, you think he's saying like that power is like centralized, or is it like a network? What I think Curtis is saying is that power is constantly fought over and negotiated. And there's a certain amount of power that people want for individuals, but there's also a certain amount of power that we want to have collectivized amongst the groups of people, whether in a democratic form or a council form. That's what I think Curtis is getting at, that we want power, but how much power do we want individually and collectively is the question. Yeah, I think, that makes sense. I think he's saying that,
Yeah, but what do you think he's trying to say? Is it the same thing or something else? What are you getting?
I think he's saying that like the world is too complex for any other individual to really understand. So people like they record, so they recourse, so they'll go back to conspiracy theories or like visions of a past that never really happened. And I think what he's saying is that after the Cold War, there wasn't so much like Western hegemony, or rather a great fragmentation.
Yeah, things did become fragmented because, I think by pointing out that making Hong Kong such a prominent part of the story is highlighting how, Western dominance was fading towards the end of the 20th century by, China taking back Hong Kong and stuff like that, and the West having to sort of force itself on the Middle East. But I find it interesting that he sort of skipped over Israel and Palestine, which could have been a major plot point when talking about the themes in this documentary, But it is the BBC we're talking about here. You could call Michael B. Jordan a nigger, but you gotta cut Free Palestine. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. They actually cut that. They cut Free Palestine, but they left the N-word.
I'm so pissed. I hate this world. Fucking hate this world.
But no, it's curious. I wonder if he has maybe in the next episode, but the next episode is Tupac's episode. But maybe, I wonder if he has a documentary that touches on a bit more.
What, on Adam Curtis or a Tupac documentary?
No, Adam Curtis. The next episode is a Tupac-centric episode for the first half.
Okay.
But I was wondering if he had something that touched a bit more on the Israel-Palestine stuff.
Yeah, if you know, let me know. Because, to talk about all of this without including Israel-Palestine is crazy to me. I mean, he even shouted out Congo and the effects of colonialism in Africa, but one of the major, divisive points of our time. The third rail is Israel-Palestine. And I think Adam Curtis was scared to even go there.
Yo, everybody's scared of the Jewish mafia, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, yeah, that's the point. That's the point. Yeah.
But he has, like, I was watching today another documentary he made, and that one is even more, like, dark.
I'm scared because this one is pretty dark, but I like it that it shows a lot of weird trivia type history. Like, hey, did you know Mao's wife was the first fucking Chinese woman to fucking kill a man on TV? Like, yo, shit, I didn't know.
It has, like, he's older. He's more like Mark Fisher kind of line, you know, generation. I had him, sometimes it has, like, that stoner white guy energy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I feel like. I feel like I'm in the mind of a very intelligent, like, anthropologist, but he has no black friends. He's hella woke, but he has no black friends. So
I want to see him versus Shahid Bose.
Okay, stop. We're not talking about Malcolm X. So every time I talk to you, you mention the white Malcolm X.
I want to see a woke-off.
Oh, I can't.
Anti-colonial woke-off.
I can't. Anyway, this is a good episode. I appreciate you coming through. I'm going to call it a day. It's late over here. But appreciate you coming through and everybody else for joining the live stream. We're going to probably do the next one sometime later this week, and that'll be the last episode of watching this Adam Curtis documentary. Sorry it took so long for anybody who was waiting. But anyway, y'all be easy out there. Good night. Peace.
Recording stop.